We thought the ambush was over. Then an old man warned us not to take the road home. 40 minutes later, we learned we had been seconds away from losing the entire platoon. People think that after surviving an ambush, every mission feels different. They're wrong. The strange thing about war is how quickly ordinary life returns. A week after the worst firefight of my deployment, the same alarm still woke us before sunrise. We still cleaned our rifles, checked radios, argued over terrible instant coffee, and laughed at jokes that probably weren't funny outside Iraq. My name is Sergeant Taylor, and exactly 7 days after the day that nearly killed me, I found myself climbing into another armored vehicle. Not because I wanted to, because that's what soldiers do. Our company had remained in Nineveh province despite the recent attack. Intelligence believed the insurgent network responsible for the ambush was still operating in the same farming district. Patrols hadn't stopped. If anything, they had increased. The commanders wanted answers. The villages looked exactly the same. Stone houses surrounded by fields of wheat. Irrigation canals reflecting the morning sunlight. Date palms swaying in the dry wind. Children walking barefoot beside old pickup trucks. From a distance, everything appeared peaceful. Experience had taught us appearances meant very little. That morning, our objective wasn't to search houses or arrest suspects. Instead, we were delivering supplies and meeting several village elders who had agreed to speak with coalition forces. Conversations often produced better intelligence than raids. At least that was the hope. I wasn't walking point this time. My injuries from the previous week hadn't been severe enough to remove me from duty entirely, but the medic insisted someone else take the lead while my leg continued healing. I hated it. When you've spent months walking first, standing in the middle of the formation feels unnatural. You constantly fight the urge to move ahead. Private Dawson had taken over point position. He was only 21, quiet, careful. One of those soldiers who never tried to prove how brave he was. Ironically, those were usually the people everyone trusted most. "You gonna tell me every step I'm taking wrong?" he joked as we left the vehicles. "Only the stupid ones," I answered. He laughed. "So, all of them." The mood stayed light during the first hour. Farmers waved as tractors moved slowly across nearby fields. Several boys chased each other along the canal carrying homemade fishing nets. An elderly woman offered our interpreter fresh bread. Nothing felt unusual. Then the dogs started barking. Every village has dogs. Most ignore patrols after the first few minutes. These didn't. 3 of them stood near an abandoned storage building at the edge of the settlement. None approached us. None ran away. They simply stared, then barked toward the building, again and again. Dawson noticed first. "You hear that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "They're focused on something." One of our squad leaders glanced toward the structure. The building wasn't large. Old concrete walls, rusted metal roof, one broken window. Half the wooden door had fallen off years earlier. According to our interpreter, nobody had used it since before the war. Still, the dogs refused to stop barking. I've learned never to ignore animals in combat zones. They notice things humans miss. Sometimes they smell explosives. Sometimes they react to strangers. Sometimes they're simply afraid. Whatever the reason, experienced soldiers pay attention. We altered our route slightly. Instead of passing directly beside the building, we circled across an open patch of ground where visibility was better. Nothing moved. No voices, no vehicles, no gunfire. Just wind. The patrol leader raised binoculars. "Doors open." "It was open before," someone asked. Nobody answered. None of us could remember. The silence slowly settled over the patrol. It reminded me of the feeling I'd had exactly 1 week earlier. Not fear, recognition. The kind that begins somewhere in your stomach before your brain understands why. I looked toward the canal. A moment earlier, several children had been playing there. Now they were gone. The tractors had stopped moving. Even the birds seemed quieter. I keyed my radio. Something's changed. No one questioned the statement. Everyone could feel it. The patrol halted. Weapons stayed pointed downward, but every pair of eyes searched windows, rooftops, and alleyways. Then our interpreter spoke. "Sergeant, what is it?" He looked toward the village road. The old man. I followed his gaze. Walking slowly toward us with a wooden cane was the same elderly man we'd seen several times during previous patrols. Gray beard, dark robe, weathered face, completely expressionless. He stopped about 50 meters away, raised one hand, then pointed, not at us, behind us. For a second, nobody moved. The old man didn't shout. He didn't run toward us. He simply stood in the middle of the dusty road with one hand resting on his cane, while the other remained extended behind our patrol. Every rifle in the formation shifted instinctively, not toward him, toward the direction he was pointing. Nothing. Only a narrow dirt road stretching between irrigation ditches and rows of date palms. Our patrol leader stepped closer to the interpreter. "Ask him what he's trying to say." The interpreter called out in Arabic. The old man answered immediately, speaking faster than usual. His voice sounded urgent, but not panicked. After listening for several seconds, the interpreter looked back at us. He says, "Don't go back the way you came." "Why?" "He won't say." The patrol leader frowned. "Ask again." The interpreter repeated the question. The old man shook his head. "No." That single word carried far more weight than a long explanation. People living in villages like this understood what happened to anyone seen cooperating openly with coalition forces. Even speaking to us could place an entire family in danger. If he knew something, he wasn't going to announce it where half the village could hear. The lieutenant considered the situation. We moved to him. Nobody argued. The formation shifted carefully across the road while security was maintained in every direction. As we approached, the old man lowered his voice. The interpreter listened. Then his expression changed completely. He says 4 men came before sunrise. Armed? Yes. They buried something near the road. A silence settled over the patrol. Nobody needed to ask what something probably meant. An improvised explosive device. Exactly the kind we'd spent months trying to find before it found us. The lieutenant didn't hesitate. Nobody moves another step. Everyone froze where they stood. The road behind us had been our planned return route to the vehicles. If the old man's information was correct, we'd been less than an hour away from walking directly into it. Our Explosive Ordnance Disposal team was nearly 40 minutes away. Until they arrived, the area had to remain untouched. The problem was, our patrol was now effectively trapped inside the village. The alternate routes all crossed narrow irrigation bridges incapable of supporting armored vehicles. Walking back through open farmland would leave us exposed for nearly a kilometer. Neither option looked appealing. While the lieutenant coordinated over the radio, I couldn't stop watching the old man. He never asked for money, never asked for food, never asked for protection. After delivering the warning, he simply stood quietly beside the road. I walked over. "Tell him, thank you." The interpreter translated. The old man looked at me for several seconds before replying. He says, "1 week ago, your soldiers carried you away." I felt my stomach tighten. He remembers. The interpreter nodded. He says he watched. The old man continued speaking, slowly, carefully. The interpreter translated every sentence. He says many people in the village believed none of you would return after that day. He paused. "But you came back." I didn't know what to say. Sometimes people assume every civilian in a war zone wants one side to win. Reality is rarely that simple. Most families simply want to survive another day. The old man looked toward the surrounding houses, then back at us. He says there are bad men here. A pause. And frightened men. Another pause. They are not always the same people. Those words stayed with me, because they explained more about war than any intelligence briefing ever had. Before I could ask another question, Dawson called from the edge of the road. "Sergeant!" I turned. He was kneeling beside a shallow drainage ditch roughly 30 meters away. He hadn't touched anything. He simply pointed. From where I stood, I could barely make it out. A thin strand of green wire disappeared beneath loose dirt and weeds before vanishing toward the road. My heartbeat accelerated. The lieutenant moved beside Dawson. Nobody stepped closer. Nobody needed to. Even from that distance, years of experience told us exactly what we were looking at. Command wire. Unlike pressure plates buried beneath the road, command wire bombs were detonated manually. Someone watched, waited, then triggered the explosion at exactly the right moment, which meant something else. If the device was armed, the person controlling it could still be nearby. Every rooftop suddenly looked different. Every open window became a possible observation point. Our radios remained calm, but everyone understood the situation. The bomb wasn't the only danger. Whoever planted it had expected us to use this road. If they realized we'd discovered it, they might decide not to wait any longer. The lieutenant immediately changed priorities. Forget the road. He pointed toward a cluster of stone walls surrounding an abandoned orchard. Defensive positions. Within seconds, the patrol spread out, establishing overlapping fields of fire while staying clear of the suspected explosive. No shouting, no rushing, just disciplined movement, training, replacing emotion. I found cover behind a low irrigation wall overlooking the eastern fields. The morning remained strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nothing moved. The radio crackled. Explosive Ordnance Disposal was still 25 minutes away. Air surveillance had also been requested. Until then, we waited, and in combat, waiting can be harder than fighting. Every minute stretches. Every distant sound demands attention. Every shadow begins looking like movement. I scanned the tree line through my optic for what felt like the 100th time. Then I saw it. Not a person. A flash. Tiny. Almost impossible to notice. Sunlight reflecting off something metallic deep inside the orchard nearly 300 meters away. I lowered the rifle, raised it again. The reflection disappeared. A few seconds later, it flashed once more. Not random, rhythmic, like someone adjusting the angle of binoculars or the scope of a rifle. "Dawson," I whispered over the radio. "I've got possible observation." "Where?" I gave him the grid reference. Within moments, 3 more rifles were covering the same patch of trees. Nobody fired. There still wasn't enough to identify a target. But every instinct I had told me we weren't alone anymore. Nobody fired, not because we weren't ready, because experience teaches you that the fastest soldier isn't always the one who survives. A single muzzle flash in the wrong direction could turn a tense standoff into a firefight with civilians still hiding inside their homes. The lieutenant crawled beside me, keeping his profile below the top of the irrigation wall. "You still have it?" Negative. The reflection had disappeared. Through my optics, the orchard looked empty again. Rows of date palms cast long shadows across the dry ground. An old tractor sat abandoned near a crumbling stone fence. Nothing moved, but something about it felt staged, too still, too perfect. I had seen it before. Insurgents were patient. Sometimes they would remain motionless for an hour if it meant catching a patrol in the open. The radio crackled. "EOD convoy is 15 minutes out." 15 minutes. Normally that wouldn't sound like much. When you believe someone may be watching you through a rifle scope, 15 minutes feels like half a day. Dawson shifted a few meters to my right. "You think they're waiting for us to move?" "I think they're waiting for us to make a mistake." He nodded without taking his eyes off the orchard. Nobody spoke after that. The silence returned. A warm wind carried dust across the road. Somewhere behind the houses, a donkey brayed, breaking the stillness for only a moment. Then another voice came over the radio. "Blue 2, we've got movement north." Every head turned. Across the canal, 2 pickup trucks rolled slowly along a narrow farm road. Neither was moving quickly. Neither looked unusual. That by itself was unusual. Most local traffic either ignored military patrols completely or turned around as soon as they saw us. These vehicles continued at a steady pace, stopping every few hundred meters before moving again. The lieutenant studied them through binoculars. No visible weapons. The trucks stopped once more. 3 men climbed out. One leaned against the tailgate. Another appeared to smoke a cigarette. The third raised a pair of binoculars. He wasn't looking at the fields. He was looking directly at us. The lieutenant lowered his binoculars. "They're observing." "Spotters?" Dawson asked. "Maybe." The problem with insurgent tactics was uncertainty. A farmer carrying binoculars wasn't automatically an enemy. Neither was a man standing beside a pickup truck. Making the wrong decision could cost innocent lives. Making no decision could cost your own. The lieutenant radioed higher headquarters. Within minutes, an unmanned surveillance aircraft already operating elsewhere in the province was redirected toward our location. Until its cameras arrived overhead, we were working with incomplete information. The old man remained beside the road. He had every opportunity to disappear. Instead, he stayed, watching quietly, almost as if he understood leaving now might make us question whether his warning had been genuine. Our interpreter walked over to him again. After a brief conversation, he returned. "He says the men in the trucks don't belong here." "How does he know?" "They're not from this village." That narrowed nothing. People traveled between villages every day. Still, combined with everything else, it added another piece to the puzzle. 10 minutes later, the sound reached us before we saw it. A low mechanical hum. High above the clouds, the surveillance aircraft arrived on station. The operator, hundreds of miles away, immediately began feeding live imagery to our command center. Within 2 minutes, the radio came alive. "Blue 2, higher reports one individual concealed inside the orchard." Every soldier tightened their grip on their rifle. The lieutenant answered immediately. "Positive identification?" "Negative. Individual is prone beneath vegetation. Object beside him cannot be identified." So I hadn't imagined the reflection. Someone really was there. The question was why? Watching? Guarding the bomb? Preparing an ambush? None of us knew. Headquarters instructed us to maintain our defensive positions while additional forces moved toward the area. Nobody wanted unnecessary casualties, especially not after the events of the previous week. 5 more minutes passed. The prone figure never moved. Then everything changed. One of the pickup trucks suddenly accelerated, not toward us, toward the orchard. Dust exploded behind its tires as it raced across the uneven farm track. The lieutenant's expression hardened. "They know we've found him." The radio confirmed it seconds later. "The concealed individual is moving." I searched through my optic. Branches shook. A figure burst from beneath the trees carrying something long across his chest. For an instant, I thought it was a rifle. Then I realized it wasn't. It was a spool. A large wooden spool wrapped with green wire. Command wire. He wasn't running toward us. He was running away from the explosive, trying to disconnect from it before we could capture evidence. The lieutenant shouted, "Do not engage unless fired upon." The figure sprinted across the orchard. Another man jumped from the speeding pickup and grabbed the opposite end of the spool. Together they dragged hundreds of meters of wire through the trees. Within seconds they disappeared behind a low ridgeline. The pickup reversed hard, turned around, and vanished in a cloud of dust. No shots. No explosions. Just silence. Everyone remained in position. Nobody celebrated, because the explosive was still there. And until EOD declared the area safe, nothing else mattered. Finally, nearly 40 minutes after the old man had stopped us on the road, 2 heavily armored engineer vehicles appeared from the south. I've never been so relieved to see bomb technicians. The EOD team dismounted methodically. No unnecessary movement, no wasted words. Their robot was unloaded first. Instead of risking another soldier's life, They sent the tracked machine crawling toward the suspected device. We watched through binoculars. The robot reached the disturbed patch of dirt, its camera tilted downward. Several long seconds passed before the team leader spoke into his radio. Confirmed. The lieutenant asked the question everyone was thinking. What do you have? The answer came back calmly. A very large command-detonated IED. He paused. Estimated 100 pounds of homemade explosive. Nobody said a word. 100 pounds. Had we returned along that road as originally planned, the blast would have struck the center of our formation. The armored vehicles waiting beyond the canal would have offered little protection. The technician continued. Based on placement, another pause. Casualties would likely have been catastrophic. For a moment, I simply stared at the road we'd intended to walk. It looked completely ordinary. Dust, loose gravel, a few weeds growing along the edges. Nothing about it suggested it had nearly become the deadliest moment of our deployment. Sometimes the most dangerous places look exactly like everywhere else.